say a big thanks to my friend Paul Folger for filling in today. We're so glad you're here
Happy
this
to be
week with
here,
me.
always hanging with you.
All right, recently Ben Affleck made comments on his high-profile divorce from Jennifer Lopez. In an interview, Affleck said he didn't want to share the reason for their split. He was quoted, "The reason I don't want to share that is it's just sort of embarrassing. It feels vulnerable."
Okay, that sounds reasonable, right? Sharing the personal details of a breakup, well, they're never fun in general, but in a divorce proceeding, how much do you have to share? That's the big question.
That's right. We wanted to ask the experts, is why we have Jodi Terzich and Shannon Ort from the law offices of Terzich and Ort here. This is an interesting question because I feel like we see these celebrity breakups, these divorces, and we're like, well, we want to know why. Well, we really don't, that's not our information to have, right? I mean, so how does it work here in Minnesota? Do we have to say why the divorce is happening or no?
Absolutely not. So Minnesota is what's called a no-fault state, which means if somebody misbehaves or they didn't act appropriately in the marriage, we don't consider that. And so there's no, very rarely would a judge or a mediator or the attorneys ask anybody, you know, why? Why are you here? Some people share that information,
But then you get to the divorce decree. That's a public record, though, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So what can be on that?
That depends on the process that you've taken. If you are able to mediate your case, if you're able to reach a resolution, you're going to have the ability to have more control over what's in that document. It's public, so everything that's in there can be seen, but you might have more control about how to word it. If you would go to a trial and you're going to dispute custody or property, and some of the reasons you're getting divorced fall out in that, then you're more likely to see that in your divorce decree, which is then again public. Everybody can see why you're concerned about somebody's parenting, or it's all in there.
Right. Okay. When you think about divorce, I know there's a lot of assets that are split, property, different things like that. Can the reason for the divorce affect that, though? I mean, is that, can that come into play?
typically no. So
Okay.
Minnesota is an equitable state, so we divide things in a presumption as we divide things equally without any consideration for marital misconduct. As with every rule, there's an exception, and it requires a very high threshold of bad behavior and hiding assets or doing inappropriate things. But generally, just being crummy, we divide things in half.
Oh.
Okay, so well, let me ask you this. When you talk about these decrees being public record, I mean, and if you're just the average person getting a divorce, are people digging into that, generally speaking? I mean, is that, I mean, who would go do that? Or maybe I'm just really naive.
It depends, right?
Yeah.
Your employer, your potential employer might, your next door neighbor might want to know what's going on,
Oh
your
my
sister-in-law from your brother's family.
You better make friends with the clerk.
That's all public.
So
The
you know
girl
who's
on the
coming down
dating
there.
app is going to check it out.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't even think to do that.
Boy,
Would you?
No, I wouldn't think to do it, but
But some
okay, it
people
makes some
do.
sense.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So obviously, another big issue when it comes to divorce is if there are children involved. So, can the reason affect custody issues?
Again, maybe, right? It depends on what's going on. So certainly if the reason you're getting divorced has to do with chemical health issues, that could certainly affect what the custody looks like, because there's some concerns about the safety of the children in one of the parents' care. So that might be. But if you were having an extramarital affair, probably that's not going to affect.
See, my brain thinks the judge is going to know all the details and he is going to order in favor of the person who was wronged. That isn't always the case.
It shouldn't be the case, right? Like as Shannon said, we're a no-fault state, and that should never be the case, that you would see a judge saying, you were wrong, and therefore I'm going to punish you.
That's really
That's
good to
true.
know, and I mean that's a judge's job too, is to be impartial, and so they're gonna look at the details, but they're probably not going to know all of the details, and they're certainly not going to have the emotion that is involved in all of these.
Well, and the good news for people is that we don't want people to, right? No one needs to know all of this. Some people feel like they need to share all this, but you can preserve kind of your privacy by reaching agreements and keeping these documents, very much to the facts of the case, so that those things don't need to be out there.
So would you, and I think this is where your expertise comes in on something like this, is if you've got a client in there and they're just spilling their guts, how do you tame that down? What do you say to them?
Pump the brakes.
I think in those types of cases, it depends on where they're going, right? Like, what is your goal? What is the goal that you want? Because we don't have to go through all of that spilling your guts if we can reach an agreement and we can get you the end goal, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
You two are wonderful.
Get you
I'm
through it.
sure people come to you with really tough decisions to make, and having you two to walk them through it is just so much more help. If you don't feel lost in the whole process.
Well, hopefully not. And giving them a place to spill it, right? They do need, some people do need to air that. And it might not affect the divorce, but they need to kind of walk through this process and have the resources and some support to understand what matters in the divorce and what matters in trying to get through the healing process.
Right.
I'd say get there ahead of time too, because you don't want things to go down the road and you're like, wait a minute. And it's, because I imagine there are points where it gets too late to even, get there. So.
All right. Well, thank you, ladies, so much. You learned something new every day on the show.
I know, it's so interesting.
Don't we? All
Jodi
right.
and Shannon, thank
To
you.
schedule a consultation, to visit tolawoffice.com. You can learn more about them right there.
More Twin Cities Live just after the break.